What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 5 of Mid-Season Evaluation. I can't believe that we're already halfway done with this series, and thank you all so much, by the way, for your support you've been showing. I really do appreciate it. But anyway, in this installment of Mid-Season Evaluation, I'll be giving a review and my honest opinion on how the Boston Uprising and Toronto Defiant have performed through the first half of the 2019 Overwatch League season. As usual, I'm going to start with the team that's lower in the standings, which just so happens to be the Boston Uprising. After one half of play, the Boston Uprising currently sit at 7-7 with a -2 map differential, which is good enough for 12th place in the overall standings. I might have the unpopular opinion when saying this, but the Boston Uprising have been a big time surprise. I thought they would be a bottom team in the league for sure coming into stage 2, and they have proven me wrong greatly. But why exactly was I doubting the Uprising at all if they're a decent team, you may be asking? Let's take a look at how their offseason went to get a better idea of what I was thinking. After a first round playoff exit against the Fusion during season 1, the Uprising went through some major roster changes. To start, they parted ways with Mistakes and their bench players who saw little playtime with the exception of AimGod. The team also decided to let go of their stars from last year. Neko left to go play for the Defiant, Striker was transferred to the Shock, and Gamsu was traded to the Dragons just days before Season 2 got started. All that was left from last year's team was Note, AimGod, and Kelix. They now had to rebuild their roster from the ground up. They at one point had 5 stars on their team if you include Dreamcasper, and now they were only left with Note and a potential star in AimGod. Boston would have to go crazy in free agency if they hoped to be anywhere near where they were last year. Well, that's what I was originally thinking, at least. I had some hope when they signed Fusions on a 2-way contract because he did just pop off in the World Cup after all, but none of their other acquisitions were really standing out all that much for me. Sure, Blase and Color Hex were looking like decent pickups, but was it really enough to fix what they left behind? I personally thought that this was the beginning of the end for Boston. There have been so many rumors about the organization treating their players poorly based off of the stories of Striker being toxic and Neko saying that Huck was a liar. The combination of Boston losing many of their valuable players, plus the organization supposedly not treating their players right, that led me to believe this would be a very rough year for them. But Boston was being looked at the same way. Everybody was doubting them last year, so I'm sure that some people weren't that surprised when they managed to defy all odds by proving their doubters wrong once again by appearing to still be a competitive team during Stage 1. Sure, they lost their first game against the NYXL, but they looked more competitive than I thought they would by a long shot. Fusions played so well in this match that even Jonak gave him praise on Twitter, and one thing I quickly wanted to note before moving on is that the team was not yet at full strength during these first few games of the season. I don't think it would have made a difference against a team as good as the NYXL, but not having their Zarya specialist Color Hex who was serving a 2-game suspension to start the year, and Fusions being ineligible to play in their loss against Shanghai was definitely holding them back from their true potential. After starting the year off 1-2, Fusions was officially upgraded to a full-time starter, and his presence could be felt a lot more than Axiom's. Not only was his tank play outstandingly good, but you could tell how valuable he was to his teammates from a shot caller and leadership standpoint. I mean, seriously, I don't think I've ever seen him not talking when the camera pans over to his face. Boston was officially at full strength, and you could tell this team had some potential after getting a statement victory over the Seoul Dynasty, who were playing fairly well at the time. Even after a tough loss to Toronto, the Uprising proved that their new roster could overcome adversity just like the team from Season 1 by winning 2 straight games to finish their stage. One of which came in a winner-go-home scenario against the Dallas Fuel where the winner would clinch the last available playoff spot. Boston further proved how clutch and scrappy they are by pulling off a reverse sweep victory in this game. Just when hope seemed lost, everybody stepped up their game. I don't know if Fusions or the coaching staff pumped up the rest of the team during the half or something, but this team had their fight again. I especially have to give credit to AimGod, who had himself a game. Not only was he outplaying his flex support counterpart in Unko, but he also wasn't letting AKM Sombra get the best of him. AimGod had proven that the team no longer needed Neko with this type of performance. The Uprising were officially playoff bound after this clutch victory, and although they got crushed by the Vancouver Titans, I don't think anyone really expected them to do much against them. They would go on to become the Stage 1 champions after all, so it's okay to lose to these guys. After playing far better than I anticipated in Stage 1, I was ready to admit that I was wrong about Boston. They were still a pretty good team even after a massive roster overhaul. I tip my hat off to the Uprising management and scouting for once again putting together a roster that could win games. A 4-3 Stage 1 record and a Stage 1 playoff appearance is pretty solid. I'm very impressed. The Uprising were once again on my radar as a top team in the league, and stage playoffs once again looked like a realistic goal for them. But before stage 2 got underway, the Uprising made a noticeable roster change by trading Note to the Dallas Fuel in return for RCK. At first I saw this as a somewhat questionable move since Note has always been a very consistent diva player, but then I remembered it's the Uprising and that nobody should question anything they do. I thought that perhaps they were opting to have some more Sombra on their lineup since RCK has proven to be serviceable on that hero. And that's exactly what they did during the beginning of stage 2. The Uprising were opting to play a fair amount of Sombra on their compositions they ran, and although Note is clearly the better diva player, at least in my opinion, I don't think it would be fair to not give RCK the respect he deserves on the hero as well. He is by no means a bad diva player, and he has shown that he is capable of making big plays as well. He's also one of the best divas in the league at negating ultimates using defense matrix, for those of you who weren't already aware. Boston Stage 2 started off quite strange. On one hand, they pulled off 2 reverse sweeps in a row against the Atlanta Reign and Toronto Defiant, which is a very impressive feat, and it shows just how clutch these guys truly are. But at the same time, if you're reverse sweeping your opponents, then that means you are by no means playing perfect Overwatch. In fact, in my opinion, it means there's actually a handful of flaws in your game. Only dominating in one half means there are obvious mistakes that need fixing, but still, I cannot deny that 3 reverse sweeps all in a row is amazing if you don't count playoff games. It's never been done before up until this point, so the Uprising were the first team in history to pull this off. But then the magic seemed to wear off after week 1, however, as the Uprising surprisingly lost in a map 5 situation for once when they played against the Spark, and sadly, in my opinion, they choked away this game pretty hard. After week 1, the Uprising were starting to struggle. Losing 4 of your last 5 is a tough way to end a stage. Now granted, the Spark Titans and Spitfire were pretty good this stage, so I give them a pass there, but getting reverse swept by the Justice in week 5 is kind of embarrassing. But at least they crushed the Gladiators in the same week, and that's pretty impressive because they were just 1 win away from having an undefeated season, and that is a definite bright spot that should not go unnoticed. Getting a big win like this shows that maybe your team was just going through a little bit of a slump. Boston would go on to miss the playoffs in Stage 2 after only going 3-4. The Boston Uprising find themselves in a decent position right now. As mentioned earlier, the record is good enough for 12th place, and if they could stay here or maybe go up a couple of spots in the standings, then they would qualify for the play-in tournament that would allow them to make the postseason if they finish in the top 2. This team is in good shape right now, and I don't see any reason why they couldn't continue to play well so long as their roster stays the same. Because of how well the Uprising have played and how much they defied my expectations, I've decided to give them a B+ as their midseason grade. I'm not sure who exactly recognizes the talent on their management, but Boston never fails to pick up talented pieces that allow them to be competitive. I firmly believe this team stood no chance this year after losing their superstar talent, and they have made me eat those words. Performing above and beyond my expectations, and having a stage playoff appearance under their belts to show for it deserves a high amount of praise. Good job, Boston. I'm excited to see where you guys go from here. And now we have the Toronto Defiant, and unlike the Uprising, I had these guys as a potential dark horse competitor. They were kind of like the Guangzhou Charge for me, if I'm going to be completely honest. I saw the Defiant as a team with potential, but I didn't have high expectations for them at the same time. I saw them as a middle-of-the-pack team that could maybe make a playoff push or two, but I wasn't really sure what to expect from them exactly, but I think I've been kind of right about them so far. After 14 games, Toronto was in 11th place with their 7-7 record and -2 map differential. This team is currently smack dab in the middle of the current standings, but how exactly did the Defiant make it here to begin with? Let's take a look, shall we? Before the 2019 season began, the Toronto Defiant decided to create a roster which had a core consisting mostly of Season 1 veterans and members of the former O2 Ardiant roster from Overwatch Contenders Korea. Some of the standout players formerly on this team are Envy, who proved to be a lethal diva player during his time spent on the Valiant, Neko, who was a top Zenyatta player in the league during Season 1, and Ivy, who has showcased star-level potential in the past while playing for O2 Ardiant. Roki, Yakpung, and Stellar also had the potential to be very solid players. While the Defiant didn't have any top players in the league at any position, they still had a pretty well-rounded looking roster that looked like they could have some promise, and I think Stage 1 did a good job of showcasing this promise. They started their season in a very exciting manner by reverse sweeping the Houston Outlaws. The Defiant also managed to secure a win against the Valiant after losing to the Reign. This was a big win for a few different reasons. For one, Envy and his new team were able to defeat the guys who got rid of him. Helping your team captain beat his former team is a great way to establish a better relationship with each other and get the team to be closer overall with one another. The other reason that winning this game and the one against the Outlaws was so crucial was because of the fact that the Defiant were able to win 2 of their first 3 games without Neko, who was serving a suspension at the time. After a tough loss to the NYXL in Neko's team debut, Toronto once again came in clutch for one of their veteran teammates by helping Neko defeat his former team in the Boston Uprising. At 3-2, the Defiant weren't in bad shape. Their final 2 games would take place in week 4, and if they could win both of them, they would clinch a Stage 1 playoff berth. And that is exactly what they did. Defeating the Hunters and Spark in dominant fashion to make playoffs is as clutch as it gets. Although they would go on to lose 3-0 to the San Francisco Shock in the first round of the playoffs, Toronto established themselves as a solid team by going 5-2 in Stage 1 while receiving the 3 seed in the playoffs. These guys only lost 2 games in Stage 1, and they both came against other playoff teams in the Atlanta Reign and NYXL. Not a bad way to kick off your first season in the Overwatch League. In the transition between stages 1 and 2, Toronto said goodbye to Stellar as he decided to retire out of nowhere. Stellar decided to hang it up due to some personal reasons, and it's kind of a shame too. He had the potential to be a really good player, and seeing him leave so suddenly was very sad. The Defiant decided to compensate for this loss by signing the Path to Pro speedrunner I'm37. The guy was always pretty good at hits game when he streamed, but what he did was nothing short of spectacular. I'm 37 went from Open Division to Overwatch League in just 3 short weeks, and we could all tell what the Defiant saw in him the moment he joined. His Widow, McCree, and Tracer were as strong as ever. The same cannot be said for his Brig and Zarya though. They weren't anything super impressive, and I think it's safe to say that he's a downgrade compared to someone like Stellar in the GOATS meta. Their 2 and 5 stage record reflects upon this heavily. It was very evident that Stellar's leadership and shot calling were being missed greatly. The team as a whole just couldn't seem to get anything going. Everything seemed to go downhill after they beat the Justice in week 1. The team couldn't seem to stop the bleeding as they went on to lose 5 straight games. Thankfully, they were able to end their stage on a good note by beating the Eternal pretty well, but the damage had already been done. The team was no longer the same. Yakpun and Envy weren't showcasing the same performances seen from them in stage 1, and Ivy Zarya had fallen off a bit. I can't blame the guy completely though. Toronto's coaching staff thought it would be a good idea to switch back and forth between Ivy and I'm 37 on Zarya, even though Ivy was clearly a top Zarya in the league during stage 1. I can't blame Toronto completely though. Their stage 2 schedule was honestly kind of brutal. Not only did they face the Shock and the Titans, but they also had to play the Fusion then the Fuel in the same week. And they were at a huge disadvantage in that Dallas game since the Fuel got to spend all of week 1 prepping for them since they had no games to play that week. The Defiant were struggling for sure, but their opponents were not making things any easier. The only game I can really knock them for is the Boston game since they somehow let the reverse sweep happen. Other than that, it's difficult for me to be super hard on them. They tried their best to win games even while being down a key shot caller and having to take on difficult opponents. Although they had a bad stage 2, they're still in 11th place right now. If they have another strong outing like they did in stage 1, then they too could very well end up being part of the play-in tournament just like the Uprising. They would be in if the event started today, and I think they'll stay around here so long as they play better than they did during stage 2. After carefully analyzing the Defiant, I've decided to give them a B as their midseason grade. Sure, they're only 7-7, but they did surpass my expectations for them during stage 1. A playoff appearance and a 3rd place finish is pretty admirable. If it weren't for their stage 2 struggles, then I might have actually bumped up their grade to a B+. I will admit that I am a little bit worried about these guys though. If I'm going to be completely honest, I feel like they may have lost some of their confidence after finishing the first half of the year on such a sour note, but at the same time, I do have faith that they could turn things around. They have the talent needed to succeed. Now it's a matter of executing. And with that being said, that is going to wrap up today's episode of Midseason Evaluation. What did you guys think of my review for the Boston Uprising and the Toronto Defiant? Make sure to let me know down in the comment section, and feel free to give your own grades for the 2 teams while you're at it. If you enjoyed this content, then be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching today's video, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.